to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuel Webby, and I can't but start off with this depressing note that it's getting ever darker, ever earlier, and I have to turn on lights ever earlier just to remind me of the dark, grim days ahead. That's my view. It's just an inexorable march towards the long, dreary, intolerable, dismal days of fall and winter. Having got that out of the way, let me welcome everybody who has joined me. Really appreciate it. And it's a couple of issues that I want to get to. Now, America's great ally, Israel, our greatest friend in the world, our greatest ally in the world, has kind of been embarrassing its greatest friend in the United States, namely President Trump, on whose behalf he launched a bombing attack on Iran, and on whose behalf he has ignored I see a good friend, Cynthia's back. That's nice to see you again, Cynthia. And so on whose behalf the United States has ignored the daily horrors of Gaza. So we had the other day an American citizen who was beaten to death by settlers on the West Bank. Now, that's, happens all the time, but not to the settlers. So, to an American citizen, he got beaten to death. So egregious was this event that even fanatical Israel supporter Mike Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, even he kind of raised the issue with Netanyahu. He said, well, this is an American citizen. We can't just sort of sit back and ignore the murder of an American citizen by Israeli settlers. And Israeli settlers, they murder on a regular basis, but you can't do that to an American citizen. And now, Rubio has said, well, we're really going to press the Israeli government to conduct a full inquiry into what happened to this American citizen. So that's one thing. The other thing is, of course, that Israel is now pummeling Damascus. This happened yesterday. And while the United States has generally been very well disposed to Israel's bombing Damascus in the days when Bashar al-Assad was in power, Israel, of course, was doing that on a regular basis and declared that it was doing it in order to get at Iran. It had to hit Iran. And that was always good enough for the United States. And because somehow Iran was ubiquitous throughout Syria. Now, the problem is that Iran now no longer has any presence at all in Syria, yet Israel continues to bomb Syria and actually bombs at an even crisper pace than it bombed in the days of Bashar al-Assad. Worse than that, it's not just that there was no Iranian presence in Syria, but worse than that, this new leader of Syria, Jolani, the Al-Qaeda leader, who is now an American client, is the one who's getting hit. And that's a bit of a problem because for the United States, it's a client somebody whose organization had been deemed a terrorist group now no longer is terrorist. The terrorist designation has been withdrawn. Sanctions have been lifted, and his government has been recognized as the legal, legitimate government of Syria. So he's an American tool. And the Americans have been pushing him into joining the Abraham Accords, which means recognition of Israel. This is the big project of Trump's. Now, of course, it's a little bit of a problem for any Syrian government to join the Abraham Accords, because recognition of Israel would mean recognition of Israel's annexation of sovereign Syrian territory, namely the Golan Heights. And of course, since the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad last November and December, Israel has extended the territory that it occupies in Syria. So it's not now no longer just occupying the Golan Heights; it's also occupying the demilitarized zone, sort of northwest of the Golan Heights. So that's all under Israeli occupation. So it's going to be very difficult for any Syrian government to recognize Israel when Israel is, holding on to sovereign Syrian territory. It's particularly problematic for any Syrian government to do so because, other than the United States, no other country in the world has recognized Syrian Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, let alone the demilitarized zone beyond the Golan Heights. So that's going to be very difficult. And now, even as the United States is pressing Israel and Syria to come to a negotiated deal, and to have Syria recognize Israel, and to have Syria join the axis of pro-American states in the Middle East, even as it does that, Israel is showing the United States a finger, and it starts bombing Syria. As always, Israel comes up with some cockamamie excuse. There's always something. Now it's the Druze. Israel cares so deeply about the Druze and needs to step in, bomb Damascus because of the Druze. But that's the excuse. So all the talk we used to have, about Iran, they're going to bomb because Iran is using Syrian territory in order to transfer missiles to Hezbollah and Lebanon, all of that talk has been forgotten. Now Israel is bombing Syria because of the Druze. Then another thing that happened yesterday was the bombing by Israel of a Roman Catholic church in Gaza. Now, that's a bit of a problem for the United States because it's a Roman Catholic church. Now, Israel can, of course, kill children at will, kill women at will, cause immense human suffering at will, destroy any number of housing, of human habitation, housing at will. But attacking a Roman Catholic church is a bit of a problem. If it had been at least an Eastern Orthodox church, it wouldn't be such a problem. But a Roman Catholic church is a problem, and naturally, the Trump administration was asked its view on the matter, and this is what happened today. Let's first of all, the Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, she issued a statement, and this is as in the Washington Post. Says White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said President Donald Trump spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Thursday morning to address Israel's strike that hit the only Catholic church in Gaza. Quote, I understand the Prime Minister agreed to put out a statement, she said. It was a mistake by the Israelis to hit the Catholic Church. That's what the Prime Minister relayed to the President. So it was a mistake. Look, I mean, it's a mistake and it's a mistake. I mean, we all make mistakes. Sometimes, you order, you put a ketchup on something instead of, instead of a mustard or whatever. I mean, you just make a mistake. Hard to see how you can make a mistake by hitting a Catholic church. What do you think you were hitting? But this is a bar for the course for Israel because it's essentially in the business of destroying and whatever means of sustenance, both material and spiritual, exist in Gaza. But anyway, so that was the thing. He would say, I understand the Prime Minister agreed to put out a statement. And then just as we began this podcast, Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu did indeed put out two statements. And it's on his Twitter account. It says, statement from the Prime Minister's office, Israel deeply regrets that a stray ammunition hit Gaza's Holy Family Church. Every innocent life lost is a tragedy. Let's read that again. Every innocent life lost is a tragedy. And you can see Bibi trying to hold back his tears. We share the grief of the families and the faithful. And then, at the same time, you see this is 15 minutes ago, he issued another statement. We are grateful to Pope Leo for his words of comfort. Israel is investigating the incident and remains committed to protecting civilian and holy sites. Now, of course, we know Israel isn't, the last thing in the world it does is to protect civilian and holy sites. But the reason why it had to issue this statement is that this is very bad look in the United States, because in the United States, obviously, the Roman Catholic vote is certainly a very important one for Trump. It's very important, for Democrats as well. And when they see a Roman Catholic church, the only Roman Catholic church in Gaza, being destroyed, people inside getting killed, that's a very bad business. But the remarkable thing is that Netanyahu's statement is extremely perfunctory. Let's take a look at it again, just how perfunctory it is. This is after Caroline Leavitt had let people think that there was going to be some major statement from the Prime Minister. Israel deeply regrets that a stray ammunition hit Gaza's Holy Family Church. Every innocent life lost is a tragedy. We share the grief of the families and faithful. And then we are grateful to Pope Leo for his words of comfort. Israel is investigating the incident and remains committed to protecting civilians and holy sites. So that's it. That's the sum and substance of this statement. And the obvious indifference of Israel is quite manifest. But as we can see with this, the the murder by the settlers of an American citizen, then this pummeling of Damascus. Um, um, well, it just shows you that Netanyahu couldn't care less about Trump. Trump, who intervened in his own, judicial case, demanding a postponement of Netanyahu's trial, and this is how Netanyahu rewards him. Um, so, but yeah, this is but it's kind of what you would have expected. Now, the other thing that I want to get to is that Trump's very strange behavior to his own base over the Epstein case. MZ, as he said, such platitude statements might as well have said "Go pound sand." He kind of said "Go pound sand." I mean that's kind of what it was all about. Um, and that's exactly right. And as somebody said, the kosher supremacism accords, and there is something to that. The Abraham Accords is about demanding a complete capitulation on the part of Israel's adversaries in the Middle East. That's what they demand of Jelani. Hey, we took your organization off the terrorist list. We lifted our sanctions. We recognize you as the legitimate government of Syria, even though you came to power via terrorism. You seized power violently. You are engaged in daily violence. We've seen what they've been doing in persecuting minorities, and yet we continue to recognize you as the legal, legitimate government of Syria, which you obviously are not. But in exchange, we want you to sign on to the Abraham Accords, which means you need to recognize the permanent loss of the Golan Heights to Syria. And it's quite possible that Jelani will do that. I mean, I mean, this seems a complete opportunist. And in other words, the Americans have their man. This is exactly who they want—a total opportunist. You know, starts off Al Qaeda, ISIS. Now he's an American stooge. So yeah, somewhere down the road, he will indeed recognize Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. But anyway, the strange events of the past week or so have revolved around Jeffrey Epstein. So as you know, the MAGA base had been very excited about some big revelations that would be forthcoming on Jeffrey Epstein. I always thought it was very odd that I never really thought that this was at the heart of the sort of MAGA demands for inquiries, investigations. I always thought that what MAGA would want the Trump DOJ to get to the bottom of would be Russiagate, the Russiagate hoax, who instigated it, how it was done, the role of Obama and Biden in propagating this hoax, and of course and of course that means Brennan, Comey, and the rest. How did they pull this off? I thought that was item number one for what MAGA would want to get to the bottom of. Then there would be item number two, would be the Hunter Biden laptop. How was the cover up affected? Because senior intelligence officials were involved in that cover up, so that would be also something that MAGA would want to get to the bottom of. And then there would also be other things such as the January the 6th hoax, the investigations of the special counsel, the congressional inquiry into January the 6th. So these were the things that they wanted to get to the bottom of, because all of these activities involved very senior figures within the US government, particularly intelligence people, and they were all directed at crushing Donald Trump, who's obviously the hero of MAGA. So I always thought that would be front and center of the MAGA focus. I didn't see the Jeffrey Epstein thing coming. I really thought that was just a eccentric, peripheral interest, because, as I've always said, that I didn't think that there was very much there in terms of at least what people are claiming, which is that this was a big Mossad, CIA, honey trap, blackmail, international extortion ring involving the richest, most powerful men on earth. I never thought that was true. I never saw any evidence that any of that was true. There was a sordid case that was explored, and the documents were published. All those documents have been published during the legal proceedings down in Miami way back, I guess almost 20 years ago now. And then of course the book was written about it by Julie Brown, and so that's, we know a great deal about that. And we also knew about the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, which also dealt with this very sordid interest, whatever, of Jeffrey Epstein. But all the rest, this vast superstructure, where I just simply never saw any evidence of this. So that's why I never really took it terribly seriously. But now it's kind of exploded into a kind of a make or break confrontation between Donald Trump and his supporters. And one has to say it's Donald Trump who has kind of brought this on himself, because of course he did during the campaign, and his various surrogates, including his son, J.D. Vance, had promised during the campaign that all this, the Jeffrey Epstein affair, would be uncovered. And it's part of the house cleaning of the incoming Trump administration. And again, when they promised this, I didn't take this very serious. I think, oh, well, just why not promise this? I mean, there, some people have taken a great interest in Jeffrey Epstein, and therefore, fine, tell them, yeah, we're gonna get to the bottom of it. And for some reason, they all assumed, well, it's not even for some reason, that the Jeffrey Epstein case would by and large involve big name Democrats, that they would be the ones most likely to be hurt by any exposure of the case, because of course they knew that Bill Clinton had been friends with Epstein, and Bill Clinton had been on his Lolita jet, and then he been to his island and whatever. So that Bill Clinton, of course, Bill Gates had also been friendly with him, and there was also Alan Dershowitz, and then you had Ehud Barak, who was labor, Israeli labor, and so I guess they thought, well, they mostly it would be Democrats who would be hurt by any exposure of information. Now, people did know about Trump's friendly relations, but they weren't particularly close or anything. But Trump had relations with Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, they were down in Palm Beach, and everyone has seen the footage of this party that Trump had sometime in the late 90s, and Jeffrey Epstein was there. and Trump and Epstein seemed quite friendly, but nobody had ever really alleged that Trump had engaged in sex with underage girls, because there's just no evidence that Trump ever had a taste for underage girls, as indeed, one has to say, neither is any evidence that Bill Clinton has a particular taste for underage girls. He liked young girls, but that's something different from saying that they're underage. But anyway, but what's peculiar about all of this is that when Pam Bondi issued that DOJ memo saying that, well, there is no Epstein client list, there is no big blackmail ring, and that Epstein did indeed die by suicide. This caused an enormous uproar among MAGA. And I have to say, this did catch me by surprise. I didn't think the response would be that. But what I think is the most surprising is how Trump has chosen to handle this, because she could have, made that announcement. There might have been a certain amount of uproar, but you could have just written it out. I mean, it's your supporters. Basically, your supporters are not going to. They're not going to make a break with Trump over Jeffrey Epstein, and that's not the issue on which they're going to make a break over. So you just basically write it out, say nothing, which is what Trump could absolutely have had as his option, to say, well, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to say, look, this has nothing to do with me. This is her decision. It's the DOJ. I don't interfere with what the DOJ does. Take it up with Pam Bondi. But Trump didn't choose to do that. Instead, Trump launched into this extraordinary tirade against his own supporters. And that is a very, very strange thing to do. And so first of all, take a look at his performance with the when he was in the Oval Office with the Prime Minister of Bahrain. And let's take a look.
It's a big hoax. No, it's not the Attorney General. No.
So first of all, this is another thing that is kind of peculiar, because he calls it a hoax. Well, it's not a hoax. You can call into question the vast superstructure that has been built up on the Epstein case. As I was mentioning about this worldwide blackmail, extortion ring, child trafficking, and whatever. You can say that didn't happen, but it's obviously not a hoax. There was a very detailed trial record that was created down in the Florida case. Even though he got off with a tap on the wrist, it's more like a blow on not a blow, like a stroke on the wrist rather than even a tap on the wrist. But there was a trial record. And then you obviously have the trial record of the Ghislaine Maxwell case. So obviously something happened. It's not a hoax. But he calls this a hoax, which again seems very confusing, because a hoax, the Steele dossier, was indeed a hoax. That was all made up. Now, what Epstein did, that obviously that's not made up. That's real. Let's see, Ghislaine Maxwell, that was real. Okay, let's go on.
No, it's a hoax. It's started by Democrats. It's been run by the Democrats for 4 years. You had Christopher Wray and these characters, and Comey before him. And it's a bad group. It started, actually, look at the Steele dossier. That turned out to be a total hoax. The 51 agents, the so-called intelligence agents, it was a hoax. It's all been a big hoax. It's perpetrated by the Democrats. And
this is where it gets very confusing um, as to what Trump is getting at. Um, because if he's saying that the Democrats perpetrated this hoax, then the obvious question arises, well, why didn't the Democrats then reveal all of this during the 4 years when they were bringing all these criminal charges against Trump? You remember the 2 federal cases, 2 state cases. Why didn't they uh, uh, bring up Epstein? I mean, if this is a hoax, this is like the Steele dossier. Steele dossier, yeah, that was a hoax, and that was pushed by the Obama administration, by interested parties like Victoria Nuland, by James Comey at the FBI, by Brennan at the CIA. Yeah, those are the people who are pushing that. That was a hoax. But if you're going to say that the Democrats are pushing this, um, then you say, well, why why did they sit on it? They were in power for 4 years. Why didn't they uh, publish this anything from those? In fact, the argument has been, and this was the argument made by MAGA, by J.D. Vance and Donald Jr. and the rest, that the Democrats are sitting on this. They're sitting on the Epstein file because it hurts them, and that's why they don't want it exposed. And now he's saying, oh, it's the Democrats who are perpetrating this hoax. And this makes it the whole thing very, very peculiar. All right, let's go on then.
some stupid Republicans and foolish Republicans fall into the net, and so they try and do the Democrats' work. The Democrats are good for nothing other than these hoaxes. They're bad for policy. They're bad for picking candidates that can get elected. Like in New York, we have a communist running. He may get elected too, actually, but he'll destroy the city. No, it's I call it the Epstein hoax. It takes a lot of time and effort. Instead of talking about the great achievements we've had, a great gentleman yesterday, as you know, went on CNBC and he made the statement that Trump may go down as the greatest president of all in the United States. And instead of talking about the things we've achieved, we've had tremendous achievement. They're wasting their time with a guy who obviously had some very serious problems, who died 3-4 years ago. I'd rather talk about the success we have with the economy, the best we've ever had, and all of the things we've done, including the Middle East. I mean, you see it. Instead, they want to talk about the Epstein hoax. And the sad part is it's people that are really doing the Democrats' work. They're stupid people. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
All right, and then he comes back to it again in a little bit. So let's see.
And all it is the Republicans, certain Republicans got duped by the Democrats, and they're following a Democrat playbook. And no different than Russia, and all the other hoaxes. They're started by the Democrats, and some Republicans, in this case, I was surprised, but they got duped. Go ahead. Well, I don't know. I can't speak about him, but I can say that Pam Bondi, I really think that she's done very good. She says, I gave you all the credible information. And if she finds any more credible information, she'll give that too. What more can she do than that? I mean, honestly, what more can she do? And we do have bigger problems. You know, we have problems with millions of illegal people that came in here, and they.
All right. So then he goes on into all the America's problems, and we should be addressing that instead of Epstein. But there's no question this is very strange, because he says it's a hoax. He attacks his own supporters. He calls them morons, that they're being manipulated by the Democrats. And And that, of course, does raise the question: well, what is he afraid of? What I mean, because that's what it sounds like, that he is afraid of something that's in the so-called Epstein files. And then he also sent out a truth in which he really elaborated on this with in this extraordinary fury. This was the first one that he sent out. What's going on with my boys, and in some cases gals? They're all going after Attorney General Pam Bondi, who's doing a fantastic job. We're on one team, MAGA, and I don't like what's happening. We have a perfect administration, the talk of the world, and selfish people are trying to hurt it. All over a guy who never dies, Jeffrey Epstein. For years, it's Epstein over and over again. Why are we giving publicity to files written by Obama, crooked Hillary, Comey, Brennan, and the losers and criminals of the Biden administration? So this is an extraordinary statement. He's saying these files, these Epstein files, were written by Obama, Hillary, Comey, Brennan, and the losers and criminals of the Biden administration. That's why one has to think that, well, if you're worried that they compile these files, then what do you think is in the files? Because I mean, these are the people who tried to destroy you. So it sounds like you're afraid of something that might be in the Epstein files. So rather than just simply say, look, it doesn't interest me. I think it's all been ridiculously overhyped. However, I'm going to leave it up to the DOJ. Instead, he just plunges right ahead and starts attacking his own supporters. So Biden, who conned the world with the Russia hoax, 51 intelligence agents, the laptop from hell, and then they created the Epstein files, just like they created the fake Hillary Clinton, Christopher Steele dossier that they used on me, and now my so-called friends are playing into their hands. That was so-called. So in other words, these supporters, the very supporters who campaigned for him, are playing into their hands. But these supporters, they want the exposure of the Epstein files because they had been under the impression that it would be Democrats who would be hurt. And Trump's fulminations, suggest that he's afraid of something very untoward about him or his associates or whatever that might be in the Epstein files, because he thinks, they were created by Obama. If there was anything in there that could have hurt the MAGA movement, why didn't they use it? That's exactly it. That's exactly it. So that's the common sense response would be, well, okay, if they faked all this in order to hurt you, why didn't they use it? Well, for 4 years they were looking for anything to hurt Trump. They haven't even given up on the John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King files, and then he goes on about all these great achievements, and then again the same stuff. And then it says, let Pam do her job. She's great. 2020 election was rigged and stolen, and they tried to do the same thing in 2024. That's what she's looking into. The country is more and much more. 1 year ago, our country was dead. Now it's the hottest country anywhere in the world. Let's keep it that way and not waste time and energy on Jeffrey Epstein. And then he sent out another truth, and it says the radical left Democrats have hit pay dirt again. Well, that they've hit pay dirt is because of his antics. This wasn't a Democrats issue. It had been a Republican and MAGA issue. And now that they sense that Trump seems to want to hide something, they said, yeah, we want the full exposure of Epstein, which they hadn't been saying up until this week. We want full accountability. We need to see all of the Epstein files. All the Democrats are now saying this. But Trump has said this. It was Trump who played into their hands by these ranting and raving against his own supporters, as if he's afraid of what might be in the files. And says, just like with the fake and fully discredited Steele dossier, the lying 51 intelligence agents, the laptop from hell, which the Dems swore had come from Russia. No, it came from Hunter Biden's bathroom. And even the Russia scam itself, a totally fake and made up story used in order to hide the crooked Hillary Clinton's big loss in the 2016 presidential election. These scams and hoaxes are all the Democrats are good at. It's all they have. They are no good at governing, no good at policy, and no good at picking winning candidates. Also, unlike Republicans, they stick together like glue. Their new scam is what we will forever call the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. And again, he uses this hoax, which is very, very baffling because there was obviously something going on. It wasn't a hoax, like the other things were indeed a hoax. And my past supporters have bought into this bullshit hook, line, and sinker. So these past supporters, so these are his base. This is his, his MAGA constituency, the people who have been campaigning for him frenetically for years and years and years. They're championing his cause and making him out to be a martyr, a victim of Democrat plotting, a victim of Obama and Clinton. And now he calls them my past supporters have bought into this bullshit. Remember what is that bullshit he called bullshit? That was Putin. Remember, Putin was also peddling bullshit. Hook, line, and sinker. They haven't learned their lesson and probably never will, even after being conned by the lunatic left for 8 long years. So remember what he has just said here. They, that's his supporters, haven't learned their lesson, probably never will, even after being conned. So he's calling them stupid, calling his supporters being stupid because they've been conned by the lunatic left for 8 long years. And then, I've had more success in 6 months than perhaps any president in our country's history, and blah, blah. And all these people want to talk about, with strong prodding by the fake news and the success star of Democrats, is the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. Let these weaklings continue forward and do the Democrats' work. Don't even think about talking of our incredible and unprecedented success, because I don't want their support anymore. I don't want their support anymore. Thank you for your attention to the matter. I don't want that support anymore. These are your most loyal supporters. Not one. If these supporters had attacked him, then that would be one thing. If they had accused him of being in with Epstein or taking part in some dark orgies with these underage girls, if they'd done that, then you can say, yeah, I don't want their support. They can go to hell. But they haven't done any of that. They have been consistent. They're the ones who are saying, hey, we want transparency. We want exposure of the Epstein case. And it's he who has taken this very personally. So no one has accused him of anything. But he has taken this very personally. And then you have to ask, well, why is he taking this very personally? All we had about his connections with Epstein was, as I say, that little footage of this party that he had. I guess it was already he owned Mar-a-Lago at the time. This was in Palm Beach. And Jeffrey Epstein came to this party, and at this thing, they seemed to be quite friendly, and it does seem that he was on the Lolita Express, even though he denied it in a number of interviews. He said he was never on it, but people have come up with flight logs in which his name appears. Somebody called Donald Trump is in the flight logs. So so that, I assume there aren't there isn't anyone else who's Donald Trump other than Donald Trump. So, but even so, plenty of people flew on the Lolita Express. That doesn't really prove that he had done anything illegal. But the behavior is very, very strange and does raise questions like, what is he afraid of? And why is he embarking on this extraordinarily self-destructive course? I mean, you don't attack your own supporters. It's the one thing you never do. You attack your opponents. When it comes to your supporters, you try to reassure them, try to be as polite and as respectful and comforting. Even when you're shafting them, you have to show that, well, I'm basically on your side. But now's not the right time, and I got to leave it to the DOJ. It's not really up to me. I can't get involved or whatever. That's what you normally do. You don't go into this attack on your supporters and calling them morons, calling them buying into bullshit, calling them that they're being conned for 8 years. His supporters have been conned for 8 years by the loony Democrats. That's a very strange way of going about it. And then, obviously, when these other things that are going on, such as his complete turnaround on Ukraine. So we had the attack on Iran, which clearly MAGA was unhappy with, but at least he said, oh, well, it was over after about half an hour, and that's it. I'm not embarking on any regime change campaign. Not interested. That's not my thing. And so at least the MAGA supporters who were unhappy about the attack on Iran on behalf of Israel, they could say, well, okay, well, it was over very quickly, and we're going to move on. We're going to put this behind us, and we're going to move on. But now he's with this Ukraine change, which we talked about on Tuesday, and then I did another podcast on this yesterday. That's a big deal, because that's a major commitment. That's not an in-out. NATO is not just going to give up after a few hours. He had made clear that he is going to be there for Ukraine. It's going to be very hard for him to stop this, because even if, let's say, knowing that he's a very mercurial person, even if he decides, I'm getting tired of all this, I'm going to stop providing weapons, we know what happens then. Boom, all of the sort of the NATO gang, all of the Mark Rutte and Starmer, and Macron and Merz, they're all going to fly to Washington and persuade him, no, you can't do that. You've got to continue with this. Absolutely essential. We're at a crucial turning point. We can't possibly give up now. And but Trump would resume the arms shipments. That is a forever war. That's not going to be something he can now get himself out of. So that's another thing. I think it's a much more serious issue than Epstein, or at least Epstein. He's made the Epstein now very serious by these tirades against his own supporters and raising questions about his own role with Epstein. But then there's also the immigration issue, where he starts talking about carve-outs, allowing um, uh, workers who are in the country illegally, letting them stay on because our great, wonderful farmers, they can't, you know, they can't get the strawberries to the market without illegal workers. You know, they can't, you know, get the avocados without illegal workers. They can't pick the jalapeno peppers without the workers. Um, all of which is, of course, complete and absolute nonsense. Um, you don't even need all these illegal migrants. You know, you just mechanize your agriculture. Everybody else does it. You just mechanize it. You know, this is absolute nonsense that you need people to handpick um, the strawberries. All of that, you have machines that can do it for you. The jalapeno peppers, you have machines that can do it. Everybody else does it. The reason they stick with this thing of having illegal migrants picking the strawberries and the jalapeno peppers is that it's cheaper. It's cheaper than investing in proper machinery. So it's a kind of, you know, like Karl Marx, who talked about the idiocy of rural life. And so America continues with this rural idiocy for the sake of cheap labor. So all of that is nonsense. But when he starts saying, "Oh, we're going to have carve outs for our great, wonderful farmers," and then we have carve outs for the hospitality industry, so hotels like his. Oh well, we need illegal migrants. The women who make up the beds and clean out the rooms. We have to keep them on, even if they're country legal. And then, of course, restaurants. All the bus boys and bus girls. They're illegally here, so they have to continue. That's an awful lot of cutouts or carve outs rather. And he's doing this. That's his signature issue. It's much bigger than Jeffrey Epstein. As I said, I wasn't aware that Jeffrey Epstein case is central to MAGA, but I was always aware that immigration and deportations are absolutely central to MAGA. So if he starts walking back on that, then I think he's going to be in an awful lot of trouble, including a very serious defeat in the midterms. So serious that the Democrats could gain um, uh, many House seats, and they could even lose control of the Senate. And then I think he's going to be in a lot of trouble. I mean, not only is his domestic agenda gone, but he's facing impeachments, and not one but several impeachments. So that basically is going to preoccupy him for the final 2 years of his presidency. So for some reason, he's chosen to go down this path. Not, you know, Trump has very self-destructive tendencies, and we saw that during his first term, when he embarked on, on something which was obvious at the time would destroy his presidency, which was the lockdowns. I mean, this was he was sold a bill of goods by that creepy little Anthony Fauci, but he signed on to it. He agreed to this. The lockdowns. Well, if you bring your economy to a juddering halt, and then you try to get out of it by pumping the economy with printed money, well, of course, that leads to spiraling inflation, and it's essentially is bringing absolute disaster to himself. That's leave aside his own mishandling of the summer of George Floyd, when he seemed very weak and indecisive. But nonetheless, I mean, it was very strange at the time why he agreed to the lockdowns, given that that this was going to put people out of business, and that economic model of paying people not to work, that isn't going to work. That doesn't it doesn't guarantee success. No, it just guarantees inflation. So I don't know. Trump seems to be embarking on a self-destructive course here. Anyway, let's take a look at our locals board, and that means our supporters, the locals board members who think about the dogs and worry about their condition, the fact that they are forced to be unrewarded. So I really appreciate everybody who are members on our locals board who contribute, and even if the dogs don't say anything, I can speak on their behalf. Anyway, Danaki, always good to see you. Says, dear George, esteemed idiot analyst Zian Honors, Matt Echret, and Joachim Flores were apparently talking on their podcast about the imminent bankruptcy of Euro NATO because of arms purchases, and I think they were discussing whether Trump's maneuver has the aim to drain the West. Man, the absolute cope of these idiot grifters is truly laughable. I didn't listen to this podcast, but it doesn't surprise me. They always say this. You know, I've been looking through the usual um, websites and so on, and you know the podcasts, and they're all say the same thing. They've been saying the same thing for 3 years. Ukraine's on its last legs. Russia's making incredible progress. And this is the last desperate throw by NATO. They've been saying this the same thing. It's 3 years. This is the last desperate throw by NATO. But when it says, I haven't seen any evidence of any last desperate throw by NATO. Common sense, you know, if you just apply common sense rather than ideology, common sense tells you that if NATO believed that it's losing this war, that Ukraine is on the brink of collapse, then what would it do? What do you normally do when you realize that the jig is up and that you cannot win this war? Why? You sue for peace. And it would be very easy to sue for peace for NATO, because while they would have to give up some territory in Ukraine, most of Ukraine, let's say they give up 20%. Let's say 20% of Ukraine, they say give up. Okay, Russia has it. That's all, 20%. But that means 80% will still be effectively under NATO control. Putin is only asking for the 4 oblasts, that Ukraine withdraw from the 4 oblasts and forego membership of NATO. Okay, well, you can do that. You forego membership of NATO, but de facto, Ukraine will still be in NATO. You know, you could say, okay, fine, we're not going to apply to join NATO. It doesn't mean anything, because essentially Ukraine is already a member of NATO. Everything that NATO has done for Ukraine all these years is effectively what it would have done had Ukraine been a member of NATO. Had Russia invaded, I don't know, the Czech Republic, NATO would probably have done for the Czech Republic about what it has done for Ukraine. There's no real difference. And NATO could take this deal and say, well, you know what? The only reason that Russia did what it did in February 2022 is that we missed the bus in 2008 when the George W. Bush had proposed giving Ukraine the NATO membership action plan, but instead NATO went weak and wobbly with Angela Merkel and Sarkozy, and instead of that, NATO only made a vague commitment to one day inviting Ukraine to join NATO. If only NATO had um, embraced the George W. Bush plan, then Russia would not have invaded. So they're going to just say, like, yeah, that's it. It's Angela Merkel's fault. It's all Angela Merkel's fault. Just like the provision of the gas becoming reliant on Russian gas. That's Angela Merkel's fault. And they'll say this. She made this disastrous mistake that she didn't accept the George W. Bush plan. Incidentally, Viktor Orban himself, and he's obviously no great fan of Ukraine or NATO, but Orban himself has said that NATO missed the bus in 2008. If NATO had accepted Ukraine as a member in 2008, then this war would not have happened. But it didn't do it. By 2022, it was already too late. Russia was now much stronger in 2022 than in 2008. And that's Viktor Orban speaking. So they can blame everything on Merkel. And then, of course, if NATO would then mobilize, get everybody on board, not just 5% of GDP, they'll say 10%. Everybody has to pay 10% because look at Russia. Russia is now this terrifying entity to our east. We need to mobilize. We need to really, put ourselves on a war footing to deal with Russia. So the reason I'm saying this idea that NATO is being defeated, NATO is losing, Ukraine's on its last leg, Russia is just marching inexorably to victory. Well, if that's the case, if that really is what's happening, then why doesn't NATO sue for peace? It will be very easy to do it. Very, very easy. They can easily rationalize it, blame everything on Angela Merkel, blame, they can also blame it on Trump and the Republicans. They held up arms, if only they'd sent more arms at the right stage. But they'll say, we still got 80% of Ukraine. Hey, we going to raise our military expenditures to 10%. We're going to go on a war footing, and this will be the biggest shot in the arm for NATO because now NATO has to confront a resurgent Russia. So that's why I'm not buying into any of the stories that are peddled by the Mearsheimers and all the rest that tell us that Ukraine is on its last legs. And then, every time I see a video of something from Napolitano, there's always, how soon will Ukraine collapse? So it was, how soon will Ukraine collapse? It isn't just, there's just no evidence of this. Ukraine was running out of manpower 2 years ago. We were doing podcasts about Ukraine running out of manpower 2 years ago. Mearsheimer was telling us about the running out of manpower 2 years ago. So, when they tell us about this great progress that Russia is making, it's, Ukraine is a bloody big country, and let's say they present it always in a very in a way that it sounds like a big number. Let's say that Russia has taken 2,500 square kilometers. Russia has captured 2,500 square kilometers in the past 12 months. And it sounds like a lot. 2,500 square kilometers. Wow, that's an awful lot. 2,500 square kilometers is basically 50 kilometers going east to west by 50 kilometers north to south. 50 kilometers is about, let's say, 37 miles going east to west, 37 miles going north to south. So it's 37 miles here, 37 miles there. That's what you get done in 1 year. 37 miles isn't really an awful lot. It's just, that isn't fast progress. And so that's why, I'm just, the, the story that we want to be told um, is that it's just not buying it. What I think is interesting is that NATO is quite careful um, about escalation. I mean, of course, NATO has escalated and done all sorts of things, attacking Russian territory and so on and so forth. But there's always this fear on the part of NATO um, about just going too far. Not because they think Putin is going to do something really reckless. I mean, Putin's already shown himself that he's not going to do anything very much. But there's the fear that Putin will be overthrown. If they just do something really dangerous, let's say when Trump seemed to be suggesting to Zelensky, hey, why don't you, can you bomb or hit Moscow with some missiles? And then Zelensky supposedly said, yeah, just give us the missiles and we can do it. And the reason I think why they probably will tell Zelensky not to do it, don't, it may not be a great idea to use to hit Moscow with these American missiles, is that there is a fear that there's a fear that Putin will be overthrown, and then some very hawkish figure will take over and wage the war more seriously. I think that may well be exaggerated, but it kind of reminds me of the fear that people entertained on during the Gorbachev years. The last couple of years of Gorbachev, from about 89 to 91, the Western powers were absolutely adamant not to do anything that might be seen to be provocative, because they were afraid that Gorbachev would be overthrown, and then they would have to face some really serious KGB military figures, running the Soviet Union. And so they always went out of their way to be as unprovocative as possible. That's when George H.W. Bush went to Ukraine and warned the Ukrainians about suicidal nationalism. Last thing we want is suicidal nationalism. Well, not because they were against Ukraine seceding from the Soviet Union. Of course, they wanted Ukraine to secede from the Soviet Union, but they didn't want to do anything that would weaken Gorbachev. As it turned out, these hardliners, these supposed hardliners in the Red Army generals or the KGB, turned out to be even more incompetent than Gorbachev and his cronies were, as we saw in the August 18th coup. They were just completely useless, and had to essentially bring Gorbachev back. I think, was it 48 hours they had to bring him back? I mean, so they had no idea actually how to organize a coup. You would have thought, as students of Lenin, they would have learned from Lenin how do you organize a coup. They just didn't do the minimum. So that's why I think in this case also whoever would come after Putin may turn out to be even weaker than Putin. Anyway, that's that. Now Shopronka says, sorry, George, but I found it painful to listen to your 4th of July podcast, to your prevarication on the term genocide as it relates to the ongoing slaughter and planned starvation resulting in exponential social disintegration. Well, I don't want to go into all the things that I went to there, and I'll just put it very simply. When you have a charge of genocide, which is a very serious charge, probably the most serious charge there is, you have the two ingredients of the crime, supposedly. And now, I think it's been used in a haphazard, reckless, frivolous way by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, by the Rwanda Tribunal. But in principle, I think they all knew you have the two ingredients. You have the acts themselves, the actus reus, all the various things that you describe, the slaughters, the destruction of towns, villages, um, and yeah, starvation and so on, and you have the genocidal intent. So to get from that slaughters, from all the slaughters, to the slaughters, the massacres, the horrible, inhuman conditions, to get from that to genocide, you have to establish that there was indeed genocidal intent. In other words, that the leaders of Israel or whatever that intended to wipe out, annihilate the existence of a people. So first of all, you have to identify who are these people. Who are the people? The Palestinians, the Gazans. Who exactly are they? So that would be another thing, because if you say that the Palestinians, then why aren't they doing it in the West Bank? They're just doing it in Gaza. The other thing is you do have to establish a record. You have to find a record that the leaders were planning a genocide. You can't just go do a circular argument by saying, well, if it's a slaughter and a massacre, then that obviously had to have a genocidal intent, and so therefore it was obviously genocide, because why else would one conduct a slaughter and a massacre other than one intended genocide? So that's why you have to have the genocidal intent. You see, the case of Nazi Germany, and that's the one that's really, the reason why they sort of created that genocide convention in 1948, is they always had in mind Nazi Germany. But you see, in the case of Nazi Germany, it wasn't that hard to find the genocidal intent. You obviously had the text, the basic text. You had the Mein Kampf. You had Hitler's speeches, where he talked about the complete destruction of the Jews, and then you had some of the speeches of other key figures within Nazi Germany, including speeches of Goebbels, the speeches of Heinrich Himmler. Then you'd have the Wannsee Conference, the minutes of the Wannsee Conference. So you'd have a body of evidence to say they had the genocidal intent. You didn't just have the actions, you had the genocidal intent. And so the reason that I've said this in the case of Israel, I said, well, you have the genocidal intent. That hasn't been proven. Netanyahu has been at the top of Israeli politics for 30 years. If he had genocidal intent, why didn't he act on that intent all of this time? Some of this time he had the opportunity, he didn't do it. He had the famous kind of mowing the lawn that which Norman Finkelstein talks about, him mowing the lawn. He he even went along with the for a while anyway with the Oslo process. He never, if he always had this genocidal intent, if he always intended to wipe out the Palestinian people, wipe them off the face of the earth, then why didn't he do it for 30 years? Now, I do think some of the people around Netanyahu, some of them did shoot their mouths off, and some of their statements might, if there were a trial for genocide, that could, the things that they've said might be used as evidence, of genocidal intent. Some of the statements of Ben Gvir and Smotrich, Gallant, the Israel defense minister. However, they weren't the leaders. I mean, the leader of Israel is Netanyahu, and then you have to also look at the number um, of people killed. We don't know the exact numbers. Well, obviously, quite a number have been killed. However, then you'd have to establish, is that number that has been killed, does that constitute the extinction of the Palestinian people? And I think that would be hard um, to claim. Now, I know that the Genocide Convention talks about the destruction of people in whole or in part, but when they say in part, they would mean that it's a substantial enough part to mean that the entire people will have been wiped out. So it can't just be, many people, as has happened in the case of the Palestinians. It has to be a substantial part. In other words, losing this number of people means that these people have been wiped out of existence. So that's why I'm wary of using this term genocide, because the moment you essentially, because you don't like the massacres, you understandably, you don't like all the horrible conditions, you don't like the cruelty, the brutality, the savagery, the total inhumanity um, of Israel. You say, well, it must be genocide, because the moment you say that, and that's going to be used against somebody whose side that you actually favor. They're going to absolutely use that against the Russians. They're going to say exactly the same thing um, about the Russians. There's no question in my mind that there will be a genocide charges brought against Russia in Ukraine, and they will use as evidence of intent. They'll use Putin's famous essay on Russians and Ukrainians, the one he wrote, I think, in 2021. They'll use various speeches of his when he says Russians and Ukrainians are one people. Ukraine isn't really a genuine historical entity, so they'll use that. And then they'll say, "Oh, look at all these terrible things that Russia did. That constitutes genocide." So you want to be careful that once you make genocide a kind of a regular thing that you toss around against those that you don't like, understandably, that's going to be used against the people that you do, or at least you do have some sympathy with. And so therefore, anyone who followed the wars in the 90s and then the trials that took place at the ICTY years later, remember, look at the haphazard way that they use the charge of genocide. Why? Because it's a politically very useful and advantageous tool to attack somebody, those that you don't like. So I'm just wary of that. I want to leave that aside. There is plenty to object to with Israel and all the things that Israel has done without getting bogged down in this argument. Anyway, I'm sure, Shopronka, you will find this painful to listen to, but that's just my view. Anyway, thank you so much for your question. And then Steve, also replying to Shopronka, says, if you overuse a term, it loses its meaning. There's nothing more savage than the brutal murder of innocent Palestinians, including women and children, by the Jews. But they are not exterminating an entire race. By the way, the Holocaust was also not genocide. This has happened in history. But the only example that comes to mind is the Roman obliteration of the Carthaginians. I mean, I don't want to get into the issue of the Holocaust. My point was only that at least that would be a case where you would be able to come up with some documentary evidence of a genocidal intent. But let's keep in mind that never happened. There were no genocide trials of the Nazis. I mean, the Genocide Convention came into being in 1948, by which time really the big Nazis had already been judged and executed. Um, but genocide was not brought up at Nuremberg, so we never really had a trial in which the issue of the genocidal intent of the Nazis was tested. In fact, there was no trial of of a genocide until 1998, and when they found some of the figures in Rwanda of genocide, and then the first genocide conviction in the ICTY was in 2001 of was it Radovan Kristic, um, and this is really the point. And I think Steve says you have to then show that you have wiped out a people, but you haven't wiped out the Palestinians of the West Bank, and you know most of the Palestinians are still overwhelming majority are still living. It's only a very small portion is now dead, but they're still living in Gaza, and they don't want to leave Gaza. So that's why it's a hard one um, to make this claim, and that is a problem when it gets used all the time, and then it's going to get used in a way you won't like it when they use it against Russia, and when they use it against China, and when they use it against Myanmar, and then who else? Don't know who else are going to use it. Maybe one day against Hungary for the way it treats the Roma. So always have to be very careful. Um, anyway, Cynthia, as I said, always good to see you, Cynthia. Nice to see you back. So Cynthia says, since Israel has armed and provided intelligence to Ukraine, perhaps because Zelensky is a Jew, um, um, hmm, yeah, I don't know. I don't think Israel operates like that. I think Israel is entirely kind of cynical and brutal. It'll work with Nazis if it serves the interests of Israel. So I don't think they would do it because Zelensky is a Jew, and has developed ties with Azerbaijan. Will it ever get to a point where Israel joins the West to take down Russia? If so, how can you explain the fact that Israel is a Russian-speaking country full of ethnic Russians, many of whom are wealthy and influential? Well, that's a very good question. I actually don't think Israel will go down this path. Just as you say, against Russia. I mean, they might, help on this, on that with Ukraine. I mean, I think that they're going to a Patriot system will be transferred from Israel to Ukraine, but that's the very point. What you just said with Israel, there are an awful lot of Russians there. That gives Russia kind of a sentimental attachment to Israel, because, as Putin said, hey, Israel, we consider Israel as a Russian-speaking country, but Israel also has to pay attention to the Russians who live there, because those Russians who live in Israel have a sentimental attachment to the mother country, and they really wouldn't be very happy if Israel aligned itself against Russia. So the Jews who left the Soviet Union and went to Israel, they have retained a certain fondness for Russia. That's very different from the Jews who left the Soviet Union and went to the United States, because they are filled with absolute loathing for Russia. So that's why I don't think Israel will go down this path. It's just because it'll alienate too many of its Russian-speaking population. So anyway, and then Cynthia goes on. Also, since the Arab world supports Israel's war on Iran, will the Arab world ever come to realize they're nothing but puppets of the West, who likely become targets of regime change by the West as well, thus prompting them to take sides with Iran against Israel? Or will it always be the case that Iran will have to look outside the Arab world to seek allies to defend themselves against Israel and keep Israel expanding expanding outside its borders? That's a really good question, and I mean the Arabs, they did cooperate a little bit with the United States on during its recent attack uh, on Iran. I don't think they cooperated with Israel. I don't think they provided any support for Israel. Um, but when the United States launches attacks, and particularly when the United States uses its power to help Israel, then they do rely on some way for the use of Arab airspace. However, I really don't think that in this recent bombing, the Arabs really took much of a played much of a role in this. They did play a role last year during the when Israel attacked Iran, and then Iran retaliated, and so they did play a role in helping Israel to defend itself against Iran last year. I don't think they played much of a role this time around. Um, Now, the regime change is a very interesting one. Uh, the West engages in regime change if they feel that these regimes are in some ways detrimental to Western interests. Now, when when it came to Syria, Syria had always been aligned with the Soviet Union, subsequently Russia, subsequently Iran. So obviously, the United States, has always had Syria in its crosshairs. Regime change. Gaddafi was always a headache for the West, even though Gaddafi made nice in later years, particularly after the invasion of Iraq. But they remembered all the bad era with Gaddafi, so regime change. Yemen, the same thing. Yemen, they kind of identified as pro-Russian, pro-Soviet regime change. Now, in other cases, the West really isn't interested in regime change unless um, its client is in some trouble. Now, when its clients get into some trouble, then they start thinking about replacing that client with somebody equally malleable, but who might at least be more acceptable to the public at large. Now, if you think, let's say, if you think of Mubarak. Now, the Americans didn't really want to get rid of Mubarak because Mubarak had been a very useful client of the United States, but he was obviously weak and feeble. He had got very old, and he couldn't survive. And then the Obama administration decided, okay, maybe we can push him aside and then replace him with somebody, a kind of a moderate Islamist, and somebody, we can work with someone like Mosey, and I thought, okay, we'll have Mosey. He's a moderate Islamist. We'll at least placate the crowds. But then, of course, they realized that Mosey wasn't going to be as pliable as Mubarak, and then they supported General Sisi. They supported the return of the Egyptian army to overthrow Morsi. And essentially, the United States got what it wanted, which was a continuation of the Mubarak regime, which itself was a continuation of Anwar Sadat. So, if one goes in to think about Saudi Arabia, then I don't think there's any particular reason why the United States would want to get rid of the government of Riyadh, particularly as they don't have um, any likely alternative candidates who would be as pliable as MBS is, or all of the rulers of Saudi Arabia, going all the way back to the 1930s and FDR. Saudi Arabia has been nothing uh, but the most loyal and abject of United States client states. So I don't think there'll be regime change. I think regime change is when you've got an adversary like Bashar al-Assad or Milosevic or Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein. Um, you know, the Shah of Iran, and people say, oh, somehow the Americans overthrew the Shah of Iran. That isn't true. The Americans didn't overthrow the Shah of Iran. The Shah of Iran, they wanted him to stay, but he was so weak and ineffectual that they realized that he had to go. I mean, he just couldn't go on. He couldn't stay in power. And then they started scrambling around to find somebody who would be as compliant with American desires as the Shah. And and then they came to the conclusion that maybe Khomeini wouldn't be so bad because they remember Khomeini from the glory days of the 1953 coup when they overthrew Mossadegh. They saw Mossadegh as a socialist, a communist, pro-Soviet. He wasn't. But they used the clerics who hated Mossadegh. They used the clerics to overthrow him. So they thought, well, these are clerics. These are, we naturally we get on quite well with these Muslim fundamentalists, more so than with these secular leaders. So maybe Khomeini will work with us. Now, as it turned out, it didn't happen that way. Khomeini had worked with the Americans in 1953. He wasn't willing to work with the Americans later on, but that doesn't mean the Americans overthrew the Shah and replaced him with Khomeini. They just thought, the Shah's gone. Whom can we support? And who will be ready to play our game? Khomeini really wasn't willing to do so, and so so I think that's why that these Arab leaders will probably not be overthrown unless they start pursuing a foreign policy that the Americans don't favor. So that, that I think would be a problem if they started being excessively pro-Russian or pro-Chinese. Then I think it would be a problem. But at the moment, I don't see that because I don't think any of the Arab countries see Russia or China as being particularly powerful. If they were became serious players in the world, then that would be different. But I don't think that they gain any advantages by orienting themselves towards Russia. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. Really appreciate your generosity, and very good to see you back. Hope you you continue being back. Hope you'll be once again a regular participant in our live streams. Anne Marie, always very good to see you. Thank you so much for your generosity. Anne Marie, of course, is our resident distinguished musician, musical expert, who always raises the cultural tone of the gaggle, well above what it would normally be. So really appreciate Anne Marie, for your generosity and for your regular participation and for all your contributions on musical knowledge. Um, and Robert, always good to see you. Thank you for your generosity. And so Robert says, some argue the Epstein files are more valuable to Trump sealed than exposed. If they're real, that's the $64,000 question, then revealing them burns their leverage. Power lies in the threat of disclosure, not disclosure itself. Um, well, I mean, I see your point. The problem is that at the moment, this is hurting Trump. It's not hurting anybody else. If that were the case, if for instance, Pam Bondi had they issued her memo and said, "That's it, case closed. We're not going to reveal this because it is so sordid, so horrible, so evil, so monstrous. You know, all these terrible video of child sex, so on. So it's absolutely horrible. We can't possibly expose the world to anything so monstrous." If she had left it at that, then I think that you could say, yeah, okay, maybe they're just going to keep it, um, keep it hidden. But Trump has kind of waded into it, and Trump has kind of made himself front and center of the Epstein files, and thus raising the question, well, what is he hiding? Because one has to assume that if they are hurtful to Bill Clinton or Bill Gates or any of his Chuck Schumer or any of his political enemies, then you think, well, why would Trump not expose them? Or at least Trump could then say, well, I'm going to leave it to Pam Bondi. I'm not going to get involved. There's nothing to do with me. It's her decision. That's it. I wash my hands of the whole thing. By fulminating like this and making these wild attacks on his supporters, he's making people think, well, you're not protecting Bill Gates, you're not protecting Bill Clinton, you're protecting yourself. Now the problem also with the threat of disclosure is that you can disclose things only during your time in office, as he found during his first term on January after 12 p.m. January the 20th, you no longer have declassified powers. So he wouldn't just be able to reveal these documents. So if he's going to do it, he's got to do it sometime within the next 3.5 years, because then that's it. They will remain forever sealed. So that, I mean, that's the time to do it. As I say, I'm not sure that there's that much, but his antics over the past 7 days do raise real questions. Or what is he hiding? Anyway, thank you, Robert. Thank you for your generosity. And then Danuki says, funny caption, Trump telling us to forget about Epstein while standing next to Epstein's neighbor of 20 years, also known as Larry Silverstein, miraculous 9/11 survivor, Howard Lucky Lutnick. Yeah, that's true. I mean, which I didn't know that Howard Lutnick was Jeffrey Epstein's neighbor on East 71st Street. I think number 9 or something, East 71st. So it's just east of Fifth Avenue, and so Lutnick was his neighbor, and therefore had presumably Upper East Side is kind of a community there, a community of the very wealthy. I'm sure he knew Jeffrey Epstein rather well. And yes, you were right. Lutnick did make a remarkable escape on 9/11 because, of course, he was the head of Cantor Fitzgerald, the sort of investment firm, and an awful lot of the employees of Cantor Fitzgerald died. But for some reason, uh, didn't he didn't go into work that day. That's always nice. I can't remember what the reason was. He had a dental appointment or whatever. But that was a really lucky break. He didn't go to work because so many of the Cantor Fitzgerald employees did indeed go to work that day. So, yeah, it's definitely a lucky escape. And then Robert says in the 80s, Trump hyped Television City as a project to keep NBC in New York City blasting elites, waving the flag. Then he sold it to a Hong Kong firm. The paradox, nationalist noise masking a global flip. You get nowhere trying to decode Trump's raucous, maladroit chattering. His words misdirect. To understand him, don't analyze what he says, deduce the strategy his chaos conceals. That may very well be. I mean that he ultimately isn't really committed to anything. We try to attribute to him some ideas that, yeah, that you think, well, that's his strategy, that's his geopolitical view. But as you say, I mean, you can believe this till the cows come home, because he often just simply doesn't follow through on any of the things that he ostensibly believes. I mean, if you look at just say North Korea, he first starts blustering and threatening North Korea. Then he kind of turns around and engages in a serious diplomatic breakthrough with North Korea, doing things that no previous president had done. He met Kim Jong Un 3 times, and you think, wow, this is Trump. This is the Trumpian geopolitics, Trumpian realism, Trumpian diplomacy. And then it turns out that he never meant any of that. He has John Bolton run that policy. Well, of course, if you're going to bring John Bolton in, then of course there was going to be no rapprochement with North Korea. Same thing with his claim that he was going to improve relations with Russia during his first term. He never did it because the people that he put in charge of his foreign policy had no intention of improving relations with Russia. All those Rex Tillersons and John Boltons, they were never going to improve relations. Why would you hire someone like Fiona Hill as to be your chief Russia person in the National Security Council? So I think, yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards your way of thinking that it's a kind of misdirection play. He has people think, oh, that's it. He's this realist. He's a serious about diplomacy. He wants to remove sources of conflict in the world, and then boom, he does exact opposite of what he claims he's going to do. Then we have Marty. Marty, always good to see you. Merry Thursday, George and Gagglers. And Marty is always great with the memes. He has this horrific picture of Mark Rutte with a big, big grin and waving cheerfully. And so thank you. Now, Cynthia says, film suggestion. Okay, that's good. All right. George, how about showing a couple of 40s, 50s films on the Gaggle, which contain hidden queer code characters in them? Here are some of the better known films depicting such characters. Rebecca, 1940. Who was the queer in Rebecca? I mean, was the Mrs. Danvers? Mrs. Danvers was kind of. I mean, there's a suggestion that she was that her fixation on Rebecca was was a lesbian. So I guess the Maltese Falcon. Oh, that was the Peter Lorre character. Okay, that was clear suggestion that he was he was gay. Laura. Um, well, that's an interesting one, Laura, because if you're talking about Waldo Lydecker, who clearly came across as gay, but nonetheless, the suggestion is that he was desperately in love um, with Laura. Um, and then Gilda, yeah, okay, Gilda. Rope, definitely. And then there's the Uninvited, Desert Fury, the Big Combo. I think it's a great idea. That is a great idea. And Cynthia, I do hope that you will rejoin our screenings. I think we've all missed all of your comments and insights and criticisms and fascinating detailed information you provided. So I think these are really good suggestions, and hope very much that you'll be able to rejoin us with the screenings and provide us with a lot of great background information on these films. And and then and then Robert says, I posted a detailed analysis of Trump's wrestling promoter tactics, which he honed beginning in the 70s as a real estate strategy. What do you see with Trump is neither what you see with Trump is neither 5D chess nor incompetence incoherence. It's sleight of hand. P.T. Barnum. I do tend to agree with that. I mean, it's like um, I tend to think that whole scene that we had with Zelensky back with when we had that thing with the let me just see. Okay, when we had the Oval Office imbroglio. And we were asked to take all this seriously, this piece of theater seriously, and then it was easy to be taken in by this and say, "Wow, look at this!" This double act between Trump and J.D. Vance, and the berating and humiliating Zelensky in front of the world, and everyone was shocked. And then NATO rallied around Zelensky, and he went to Downing Street the next day, or I think 2 days later, and Keir Starmer hugged him out in the open, and Macron hugged and kissed him, and Kaya Kallas, went into ecstasies about the glories of Zelensky. And then you think about it, that was probably a giant con. We were all taken in by this theater, thinking that Trump was seriously contemplating abandoning Zelensky. He said, "Well, look at this. No one has ever talked to Zelensky like this." And then for 48 hours, they held up military aid, held up intelligence, and then 48 hours later, they released it all. It was a piece of theater that we were entertained by. And as you say, Robert, that he knows the television business, he knows the entertainment business, and he's very good at getting everybody to pay attention to that shiny object. We're all become preoccupied, becomes this world conversation. My God, this humiliation and dressing down for Zelensky. This is obviously the end of the U.S. commitment to Ukraine, and lo and behold, it isn't anything of the sort. And this is where we are now. So that's exactly what he's very good at: distract people, get an exciting piece of theater, and then hey, he does what I think he always intended to do. So anyway, I thank you. And Denaki says Ukraine is on its last leg. Germany's bankrupt. Germany buy hundreds of cruise missiles for Ukraine. The missiles range is 500 miles. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Always. Yeah, Germany has nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's end of the road. And then it's just everyone. There's the cupboard is bare. There's nothing in the cupboard. And then Denaki says Rolling Stone interview September 2015. After I met Ivanka, and praised her to her father, he said, "Yeah, she's really something. Oh, what a beauty that one. If I weren't happily married, her father." Yeah, I know that was. Um, yeah, I know that quote. Very strange. It's a very strange thing um, to say uh, um, about that. And then Robert also says the Wizard of Oz has plenty of gay-coded characters, hence the term "friend of Dorothy." No, I think that's absolutely right. It's it's an interesting case that you always were supposed to go and accept certain things, and um, never really thought that there was anything um, odd about it. Like as I say, Clifton Webb playing Waldo Lydecker, who is obviously gay, but you're expected to believe that he's so besotted with Laura that he's ready to kill her. Um, and then of course, and same with the Maltese Falcon, with the Peter Lorre character. The only hints of that. Well, no, there are more hints of that. But I think it's a really that's a really good idea, Cynthia, to do that for our the next screenings. There are an awful lot of them. There are an awful lot of them, and it is a very, very interesting phenomenon that that you present this, and then people kind of accept it, or they don't accept it, or they um, pretend to believe that a person who's obviously gay is actually straight. It's it's very. I mean, it's like in the sort of all the various British comedies. If anyone has ever watched those, the Carry On movies, almost all of the characters in the Carry On movies were played by actors who were gay. But in the films, in the Carry On movies, they're all supposed to be lechers. They're always leching after, uh, you know, buxom, beautiful young women. But you go through this kind of routine of accepting something preposterous. An actor who is really camping it up is, however, a lecher, and it's like it's a little like the secret of Liberace. Liberace where nobody really knows whether he's gay or not. Anyway, my time is up. Thank you very much, everybody who has joined us. Thank you very much for all of your really interesting questions and comments, and really appreciate all of that. And Robert says Webb was great in Sitting Pretty. Um, yeah, no, no, that's right. Um, yeah. I can't remember. There was somebody that um, and maybe maybe I'm misremembering that originally they wanted to cast Clifton Webb as Rhett Butler um, in what's the name, Gone with the Wind, and I may be misremembering it, but they kind of decided that Clifton Webb would just simply be too effeminate for Rhett Butler. But of course, interesting enough, um, Clark Gable, I mean, they originally had George Cukor as the director of Gone with the Wind, and George Cukor was gay, and Clark Gable just couldn't work with Cukor. He just found him, too effeminate. It was just so Cukor was fired because he couldn't work with Gable. Anyway, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you above all to everybody who contributed to the tip jar. I'm going to have to raise the matter with the dogs. go on my knees, in humble, abject entreaty, and say, I did what I could. I did my best. It's you need to make your own presence felt. Maybe that will get more money into the tip jar. I'm not as good as they are. So thank you for today. We're going to do some more podcasts over the weekend. Then on Monday, we do the joint live stream with Peter, and then I'm back solo Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Look forward to seeing you then. All the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.